America's two great pastimes collide on this podcast. It is baseball and making money from the dog days of summer through the October Classic. Greg Bases Peterson's going to be free swinging at the betting board as he tries to hit a grand slam for your bankroll. Now here is GP.
Hello and welcome to lovely Las Vegas for MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson. Got a tremendous podcast for you as we're going to be talking to our buddy Jake Brown. He does a lot of the podcasting for the New York Post, including running a Mets podcast. And we're going to be taking a look at the NL East today. As I've been saying on this podcast, I know that the news hasn't necessarily been great with anything, but we're still getting prepared as if the 2020 season is going to be played. So we're going to be talking to Jake mostly about the under-the-radar signings in the NL East. I think it's going to be a very competitive division, and there are a lot of moves that happened in that division, including Zach Wheeler going from the Mets to the Atlanta Braves. As we know, Noah Syndergaard, he is going to be out of the fold. What's going to be happening with Yoenis Cespedes? What's going to be happening with the World Series champion Washington Nationals now that they don't have Anthony Rendon? And we're going to ask about the Miami Marlins as well, because you know what? Gosh darn it. Some of you guys, I know you want to get some fish into your betting diet, so we're going to be talking about that for two segments. We're going to talk to them mainly about the Mets in the second segment, and then we're going to have a long final segment just to talk about the division in general, how a shortened season helps out some teams, maybe hurts others, so it's going to be a very good chat. And I know that one of you guys asked me some Twitter questions in the Twitter mailbag, as I've been doing on this podcast and my other podcast, Hoopin' with Hoops. Always love to be able to answer those in the first segment. At gunit_81 is where you can fire them in, so let's get into it.
So you have questions, and Greg may or may not have any insight into them, but let's dive into the Twitter mailbag.
We got this in from Chris Heath. You can follow him on Twitter, at ChrisHeath13. He asked at gunit_81, and this was just a variety of different questions, assuming MLB returns on neutral, no-fan parks and everything like that, whether it be spring training facilities out there in Arizona or if it actually winds up being the home ballparks. How much do you think a home field advantage is worth? And with this regard, in my opinion, if they wind up all being played in Arizona, it's really going to be nothing. But if you do have actual travel involved, it's still worth a couple cents. And here's what would be really huge. If you wind up having a situation in which all these teams, they wind up playing in their home ballparks, but without fans. So let's say Milwaukee Brewers still wind up playing at Miller Park and things like that. And let's say that you've got a team out there on the West Coast. We'll throw out there our good buddies with the Seattle Mariners. They wind up playing a doubleheader at home for some reason because these players, as we've been hearing, are trying to get in as many games as humanly possible. Let's say that the Mariners wind up playing that doubleheader. They have to fly into Milwaukee, and then that's got a 7:05 p.m. Central, which will be a 5:05 p.m. Pacific time first pitch for the very next day. That is a huge advantage for the Milwaukee Brewers because, for one, the Seattle Mariners, in a doubleheader, they probably had to go through a whole bunch of arms. Two, you just got a tired team in general that had to go halfway across the country to play that game. This is one of these situations in which, when it comes to like home field advantage, when it comes to righty-lefty splits, I don't necessarily have a set money range in mind with regards to how many cents it involves with the line, but obviously a doubleheader, a team going from one coast to the other, that could be as much as like 25, 30 cents that I'm going to have to adjust that line. And I'm just throwing out their arbitrary numbers. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less, because let's say that the Seattle Mariners wind up playing those games and they just wind up cutting short the second game due to rain. As we know, that would not be happening in Seattle because they play in a dome, but we're just throwing it out there because I like to be hypothetical with things like that. Then it maybe affects it a little bit less. Meanwhile, if the Seattle Mariners in their second game of that doubleheader marathon, they wind up playing 18 innings, it's going to affect it a little bit more. And then he was also asking with regards to just how short porches, foul ball territory, humidity, etc. is a little bit of an impact with regards to home field advantage. And this is sort of a team-by-team situation. Many of you guys may remember the 2019 campaign and the most demonstrative team home to road. That would be the Chicago Cubs. At home, the Chicago Cubs were almost an auto bet until it got to September. Now, in September, when they wound up blowing every one of those games to the St. Louis Cardinals, I don't know how and I don't know why, they just kept on winning at home, and a lot of those games were one-run games. So if you wound up taking the Cubs on the run line at home, especially towards the month of August, even into late July, you weren't necessarily making a lot of money, but if you just kept on taking that money line, you were able to have a very good run of it. But on the road, the Cubs won 40% of their games. They were 32-48. So the home field advantage there, very significant. I had to just completely handicap the Cubs in a whole different way. So, I mean, it's one of these spots where if I were to put a exact money range on it, it would be a little bit different pitcher to pitcher. Actually, if you want me to be honest with you, Yu Darvish was probably their best road pitcher after the All-Star break during the second half of the year, as crazy as it sounds, because I was always making the joke on this podcast that I always want to be fading you, but he was actually very solid on the road. But when you had a guy like a Kyle Hendricks who had an ERA right around 2 at home and an ERA north of 5 on the road, you had to just completely handicap him different game to game. He was a guy that I had more than a 50-cent difference on home to road. It was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, that's how big some of these splits can be. Meanwhile, you take a look at a team like the Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays on the road, they were very solid. 49-36 is what they wound up finishing up on the road. At home, they were very similar. 50-33. They had one more home win than they did a road win. And with the Tampa Bay Rays, I awarded them close to nothing whenever they were playing at the Trop, because these guys, they pitch so similarly. And what's unique about Tropicana Field is that it's a dome and the ball is going to carry a little bit less. So you're pretty much facing the Tampa Bay Rays as if it's almost a neutral field, because they just didn't have a lot of fan support. So that's one of those things that I was getting at as well, is that when it comes to a lot of these stadiums, that they're more dome stadiums, you're going to award a little bit less with regards to home and road, because it's one of these situations in which the conditions are always going to be the same day to day. Meanwhile, when the wind is blowing in and you've got a guy like Kyle Hendricks pitching at home, he is so much more dominant than when he is on the road in more of those, I guess you could call them, neutral conditions. And you want to be taking a look at just the juice ball or not as well, because having a juice ball, that's going to bode very badly for a guy that gives up a lot of hard contact. Shane Bieber, how many times weren't you holding your breath whenever he took the mound for the Cleveland Indians, because he was very much a guy that he's a little bit more of a fly ball pitcher. He would have so many loud outs that it's not even funny. You felt like you were dancing with fire whenever you had him out there and the wind was blowing out in a ballpark. So that was something that you wanted to take a look at. A guy that wound up having just an absolutely atrocious 2019 season as well was Chris Archer. Chris Archer, as we remember, at the Trop, he was very good for the Tampa Bay Rays ever since he's been traded to Pittsburgh. This guy has been a sack of doo-doo. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This guy is just a fade every time he takes a mound. Why people still believe in Chris Archer, I don't know, but you take a look at those sort of things as well. You obviously take a look at righty versus lefty statistics. You always want to be taking a look to see, okay, this guy does absolutely tremendous against right-hand pitching. This guy, not so much. And the biggest example of this was the Oakland A's during the 2019 season as well. The Oakland A's won something like 3/4 of their games against left-handed pitching. They were just absolutely raking them left and right. Against right-handers, I mean, they were okay. I mean, they were winning a couple more games than they lost, but you could tell their batting average, it was like 20 points higher whenever they were facing against left-handed pitching, and just boded very well for them. So you take all this into account with regards to your handicapping. It's going to vary game to game, because you have to take a look at who was all used on the bullpen that day as well to try to figure out, okay, here's who I might be seeing out there in the bullpen as well. And that's part of why I do full game betting as well, because you're able to utilize the fact that, okay, this guy came out of the bullpen the day before. We're probably not going to see him again. Or if he was used out of the bullpen, like a Josh Hader, what we noticed with Josh Hader is that when he had a day of rest for the Milwaukee Brewers, this guy was lights out. He was going to give you 2 innings. He was going to be spectacular. But there was a stretch during the 2019 season in which they used him 3 straight days, and wouldn't you know it, he was just completely shelled in that series against the Oakland A's, because they brought him out there game after game after game, and that's when the wheels fell off for Josh Hader. So hopefully this did a very good job of being able to clear up how I base different pitchers based on righty versus lefty situations, how I base home field as well. Like I said, if all these games wind up getting played in like these Cactus League, Grapefruit League ballparks, there's really going to be no home field advantage. but there is a little bit of something to be had if they are having to travel to the home city of these teams as well. So if you have further questions on this, let me know at @GUnit_81. Hopefully I gave you guys a solid answer on that. And for the next two segments, we're going to be talking with our good buddy Jake Brown out there in the city of New York, a place that I know has obviously been a little bit ravaged by the coronavirus, so hopes and prayers out there with them. But we're going to be talking about the New York Mets in the second segment, and then in the final segment, we're going to be taking a broad look at the NL East, and that's coming up right here on MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson.
Greg is phoning a friend and going out to the Azunia hotline.
And we are back here on MLB Overtime Betting. It is my great pleasure to be joined by our next guest as we're coming at you from the lovely city of Las Vegas. This is a man that joined me quite a bit during the 2019 season, and this is a guy that does a little bit of everything. He does a lot of the podcasting for the New York Post. He is the co-host of the Amazing But True Mets podcast as well, so he does a lot of that. This is a man that is out there in the lovely city of New York. Obviously, they've been going through some rough times, but it looks like things are getting a little bit better, and you know what? Getting baseball back into our lives would be the ultimate great thing. You can follow him on Twitter at Jake Brown Radio, as it is Jake Brown joining me. And I know it's been a little bit of a rough year for both of us. We both love baseball so much, and the season not starting on time is a little bit of a bummer, but I know that we're both getting through it as best we can, and I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's crazy time, especially here in New York. I just heard it right now out the window is the cheering for the hospital workers, nurses, everything, doctors. I think it's a certain time each day. I think 7 p.m. each day that they do it. So it is definitely uncharted waters we're in right now. And hopefully at some point, at least in the summer at some point, we get baseball to start.
Absolutely. And then when the baseball season does start, it's going to be very interesting because as we both know, Noah Syndergaard's not going to be with the Mets in 2020. This is a guy that underwent Tommy John surgery a couple weeks ago. Zach Wheeler in the offseason, he wound up signing elsewhere. So the Mets, they don't have their full complement of pitchers that we thought they were going to have for the 2020 season. What do you make of the pitching staff in general? Because obviously you still have Jacob deGrom. We all know what Jacob deGrom is able to bring to the table. They make that Marcus Stroman trade towards the trade deadline in 2019, so they certainly are loaded there, but we both also know the bullpen, it had some very good times and it had some very not so good times in 2019.
Yeah, well, I just chatted with one of the key members of the rotation on the podcast today, Steven Matz, who's really got to step up his role now. He's the only lefty. I think they will be okay. I think a shortened season for this year helps them because they could patch together every 5 days with, if Michael Wacha struggles, you put Seth Lugo out there. I know Lugo is dominant for your bullpen and you want him in the bullpen, but I don't think it's the end of the world. If Wacha struggled, you have a sixth option still in Seth Lugo. So I think they'll be okay. I think the bullpen, a lot's going to ride on them. They just have to bounce back at least halfway better than last year because those were career worst years for Diaz and Familia. And Justin Wilson was the only, and Lugo were the two reliable guys. Outside of that, everyone else, stunk. So I think they'll be okay pitching wise. The key will be guys being healthy, staying healthy, and getting Cespedes healthy in the lineup. In a shortened season, you hope that now this extra rest for him, if this season starts July 1st, you have to figure he's ready then. It can't be, all right, let's wait for him to rehab. At that point, you need him in the, opening day, I'll call it, the first game lineup because he's a fixture of that middle of the lineup that they badly need. So I think the pitching will be fine without Noah. It hurts, but, it's not as bad as if you lost deGrom. And, Marcus Stroman's in a walk year, so if they do play, he knows that he's only got a couple of months to prove himself to get that $20-25 million contract.
Absolutely. I do think it's going to be very interesting because it's sounding like to me the absolute earliest that we're going to be getting baseball is early June. Right now, I'm thinking that we're probably going to get a baseball season that starts in July. And even if you play double headers and things like that, there's absolutely no way that you're going to get a 162 game season. Do you think that helps or hurts the Mets? Because I think it's so fascinating with so many of these teams because the Mets, they obviously have a couple dominant starters, but I just don't know if it helps teams that have a deeper bullpen or if it helps a team that has just a couple dominant starters and they sort of go the Washington National route. Obviously, they're not going to be bringing in like Jacob deGrom in relief every third day or anything like that, like the Nationals were doing in the postseason. But with that said, they're obviously able to let those starters go a little bit longer because there's going to be a bit less of an innings restriction.
Yeah, well, I think it helps teams like the Mets and especially the Yankees who have injuries all the time occurring left and right. It gives guys now a chance to kind of rest up, and you could argue too it hurts them because if they get hurt in August with a 2-month injury, maybe they're done for the year. You don't know. So it goes both ways. I do think that it will help the Mets because they're patching together. They're hoping Waka is due for a big year. He's on a 1-year deal. You got a couple years on what you got Rick Porcello on this 1-year deal. So you got guys on these 1-year deals who need to prove themselves now in a short amount of time. So I think they know what's at stake for them, that these couple of months of brilliance could equal big money in the offseason. Also, a big thing that's getting overlooked a bit is we've completely eliminated cold weather games. I mean, in New York, up through May at points, there were times where it's windy and cold, especially at Citi Field by the marina there, is that you're taking off every single cold game. Every game, if it were to be in New York, is going to be warm weather. And if it's not in New York, it's going to be in Arizona or Florida, which is going to be all warm weather games. So I think that really benefits a lot of these East Coast teams and teams who deal with rainouts, who deal with, cold, who have to deal with these conditions that have a huge impact that you don't even think about on gripping the ball and pitchers and getting on the seams, everything, and just staying warm. So I think that weather aspect in the shortened season, both those combined, help the Mets and will help a good amount of teams.
Absolutely. As we do have Jake Brown joining me right here on the podcast, does a great job of being able to do a little bit of every thing for the New York Post, including hosting their Mets podcast. And he is joining me right now. And your team out there in New York, they do have, in my opinion, the most forgotten man in baseball, Yoenis Cespedes. The reason why he's forgotten about it is because obviously during the 2019 season, it was just one freak injury after the other. He wound up not playing the entire year. From everything I was hearing, it looked like he was probably going to be ready for opening day if it were to have occurred in late March, early April, things like that. What are you hearing on the Cespedes front? Because when this guy is at full board, we remember him from that run that the Mets made to the World Series. This guy can be a game changer. And I think that this is a guy that he might be able to be that boost that the Mets need, along with a guy like Pete Alonso being able to duplicate the numbers they had from last year to make this a really fearsome lineup.
Yeah, well, I think the delay is the big thing that's helping him. I disagree that he would have been ready for opening day in late March because he was just running and rounding the bases. Now, this kind of works both ways. Yes, he has the time here, but he's also not getting any baseball activity in, really. The social distancing, it's not like he can get every aspect of the game in right now for at least the next couple of weeks. Your hope is that maybe the month of May he could get all that swinging and those things together. But now it gives him more time. It gives Jed Lowry more time, but who knows with Jed Lowry? That injury just seems to be a mystery. But it's really Cespedes' chance now to be ready for that first game, and he has so many incentives in his deal. And now those are all changed now that there won't be 162 games, but he still has incentives that could earn him an extra 10, 15, 20 million potentially if he goes out and has a monster shortened year. I mean, if he goes out, hits 25, 30 homers, he's going to get himself big money in the offseason. Another guy in a walk year. So these walk year guys are huge, and Cespedes, like you said, is really a big part of that middle of the lineup. And imagine if they did get Jed Lowry, that just gives them so much more. I mean, you can't expect anything from him, but this was formerly a 30-homer guy with Oakland right before the Mets got him, who was just falling off the face of the planet after only playing, 1 or 2 games last year and getting a couple at-bats in. So if they were to get that combo back at their best, the Mets, are a scary team.
I'm right there with you. And coming up next right here on MLB Overtime Betting, we're going to be keeping Jake on the line, and we're going to be talking to him about what he sees from the other teams out there in the NL East and just what he's looking for in this offseason of uncertainty in general. And that is on the other side right here on MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson.
Welcome back to MLB Overtime. Greg is throwing a gem, so yeah, he better not blow it.
And we are back here in lovely Las Vegas for MLB Overtime Betting with myself, Greg Peterson. We've still got our good buddy with the New York Post, Jake Brown, on the line, and you can follow him on Twitter at Jake Brown Radio. And now we've talked a lot about the New York Mets, but let's take a look at the rest of the division, because I think the whole NL East is really interesting, because I mentioned Zach Wheeler and the fact that he signed elsewhere in the offseason. He wound up signing with, you guessed it, the Philadelphia Phillies, a team that just was managed so badly the last 2 years. I think we both agree that while the Mets didn't necessarily have the best managing in the world, the Philadelphia Phillies well, their managing left a little bit of something to be desired as well. But in the offseason, they wind up signing Zach Wheeler. They bring in Didi Gregorius as well. So I think that is going to be very fascinating. What do you see out of the Philadelphia Phillies this year? Because I feel like Bryce Harper is going to have a solid year, but I just don't think he's ever going to quite live up to that contract. I just feel like Bryce Harper is still a guy that he's just going to consistently hit right around 250-ish. He's going to give you some pop. He's always going to give you that tremendous effort, but this is not a guy that is going to ever be really that consistent 300-style hitter. I think the Phillies are going to have a good year, but at the same time, I feel like this is one of the toughest divisions in baseball, at least with regards to everyone aside from the Marlins being so closely knit.
Yeah, the Phillies are definitely a much improved team, but their bullpen still isn't an A-list bullpen. I know they went out and got Blake Parker, but this is still, a very mediocre bullpen that hurt them a lot. I still think the Nationals probably are the team to beat in that division. They improved their bullpen, which was essential for a team that was just decimated by the bullpen. So, listen, I think the Phillies are going to be good. They're going to be in the playoff race. They got a shot at a wild card. I think a shortened season definitely helps them after all the injuries that they put up with last year. It seemed like everyone on the Phillies got hurt at some point. And, they have a couple of veterans in there, and it's not all about Bryce Harper. They went out and got Neil Walker. Jay Bruce is back. I like Jay Bruce, and I like him in Philly. I like him in that ballpark. So they have pieces there that can be a playoff team, but I think this is still a four-way battle if you want to look at the Braves, between the Braves, Nationals, Phillies, Mets. I think this shortened season puts it up for grabs for anyone. Trying to pick this division, until we really know how many games, even when we do, it's really going to be hard because a team that goes on a big run in a 100-game season, you could forget about those 62 games. You know how many teams have blown seasons, cough, the 2007 and 2008 Mets the last couple of weeks? If you cut out 30 to 60 games, it lets anyone win this thing.
Being a Milwaukee Brewers fan, I do remember when those collapses. I do have to be honest with you. They were the beneficiaries of one of them. And you do mention the Atlanta Braves as well, as we do have Jake Brown joining me right here on the podcast. And I'm very intrigued by this team because obviously they've got so much young talent in that lineup. You've got Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna Jr., Ender Enciarte is a guy that I felt like underachieved for much of last year. I think that he's going to be better this year. This is an Atlanta Braves team that during those summer months, they were arguably the best offense in all of the National League. And now you bring in a couple guys that you just didn't know what you were going to get out of them in the bullpen. Shane Green wound up closing out the 2019 season strong, but immediately after that trade, he was struggling. Mark Melanson is Mark Melanson, but you do bring in Will Smith. No, not the Will Smith from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or the movie Hancock or anything like that, but rather the reliever from the New York Giants. And I also think that Cole Hamels was one of the most under-the-radar signings in all of baseball as well, because we saw before he got injured with the Cubs, this guy was dominant. After that injury, he just was not the same guy, but I feel like that's a big upside signing and one that the Braves need because they are such a young team. Being able to bring a guy that's like 35, 36 years old might be exactly what they need to get through a season like this.
The Braves are scary because you got to remember, too, they essentially have four outfielders. Because remember, they got Marcell Ozuna in the offseason. They have Ozuna, Markakis, Enciarte, and Acuna Jr. Their fifth outfielder is Adam Duvall, who for some teams is a starter. So in the outfield alone, they have depth. We know about their youth in the infield. Travis d'Arnaud is there, and anyone who faces the Mets, they leave the Mets and come to face them, dominates. So Travis d'Arnaud is probably going to have a good year in Atlanta. And yeah, their bullpen is just so deep with Melanson, Will Smith, Shane Green, Darren O'Day. They are pretty stacked. And like you said, Cole Hamels. And just think, if they do need him, and if change of scenery does it for him, they have Felix Hernandez there, which is very intriguing because a lot of people think he's finished. But I think that whole change of scenery and going to Atlanta and being in Seattle for so long could work wonders for Felix Hernandez if they need him at some point. They don't really need him in the rotation with Soroka, Fulte, and Fried and Hamels and Newcomb. But, if they do need spot starts or he can be their fifth starter over Newcomb, he is definitely an interesting option. So, yeah, that team is deep, and you got to throw them in the equation as a team that could win this division.
I'm right there with you. I think that this is just a scary division in general because you've still got the Washington Nationals as well. Now, obviously, Anthony Rendon winds up going to the West Coast. He signs with the Angels, but you've still got all those talented pitchers. Steven Strasburg, obviously, Mad Max Scherzer is still out there as well. And I think that it was just so under the radar what they were able to get from their relievers that they were able to pick up midseason as well. I think that this is just such a intriguing team with Anibal Sanchez really doing his best pitching during the postseason as well. This is a guy that is a little bit of a pariah, but he just goes out there every fifth day. It just seems like he's a steady Eddie guy. He's not going to light the world on fire, but at the same time, he's going to keep your team in it. What do you make of the Washington Nationals? Because I actually do think a little bit of a addition by subtraction is the fact that they did not bring back our good friend on this podcast, Fernando Rodney.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about them is the two bats that they added are going to provide a huge boost, and that's Starlin Castro and Eric Timms. I mean, you know of Eric very well, and he's a guy who could blast 30 homers if he needs to. He's a huge piece to that lineup, and think about it, they have some depth there with Carter Kieboom, and they still have Ryan Zimmerman. I mean, that infield is solid. Trey Turner, obviously, and then the outfield with Soto, Robles, Eaton is solid, and Michael Taylor as well. So this is another team. We're talking about depth a lot. This is a team that has depth. Where they lack is if someone in the rotation gets hurt. I mean, Joe Ross is essentially their fifth starter. They don't have much beyond that. I said that their bullpen's good, but it's because they brought guys back, but they didn't really add a ton with Doolittle. I mean, they add Will Harris, of course, but they bring Doolittle and they bring Hudson back. So Will Harris is going to have a monster role for this team as kind of their setup man, most likely, if they do keep Doolittle. But listen, the Nationals are stacked, and I think those two bats could be what pushes them over the edge. And I'm looking for Eric Timms to have a big year and Starlin Castro to also have a big year. Two guys that you almost forget that they signed. I guess it happened also so long ago that you forget they added them, but they're a scary team.
Absolutely. I think that part of the reason why Starlin Castro got forgotten about is because he was on the other team out there in the National League. That would be the Miami Marlins. Now, the Miami Marlins are not going to be competing for a World Series. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, but I'm actually a little bit intrigued by some of the guys that they brought in. A guy like a Francisco Cervelli. He's probably washed up, but at the same time, they wind up bringing him in. Jesus Aguilar, a guy that I know, being a Milwaukee Brewers fan. Just 2 years ago, this is a guy that was in the All-Star game. I mean, it sounds absolutely insane to say that, but he was, and you've got actually some, I would call it halfway decent pitching, because Jordan Yamamoto was a guy that towards the end of last year, when he was given some opportunities, he was able to do decent. Before the injury, Pablo Lopez, he was doing an okay job. Heck, even a guy like a Sandy Alcantara is a guy that I think is a decent starter. The question is, just what are you going to be able to get out of some of those guys in the outfield? Because Lewis Brinson, who was a part of that Christian Yelich trade, my goodness gracious, he is terrible. I mean, the fact that this guy gets MLB at bats just absolutely stuns me, but this is a Miami Marlins team that, because they do have some actual decent starting pitching, I think might be able to hang in some games. Question is, what are you going to get out of the bullpen with guys like Brad Boxberger and company?
Yeah, the bullpen is not very good, and their outfield, they got some depth, but it's a lot of guys you're hoping for the best when it comes to Corey Dickerson, who's more of a fourth outfielder, but has had times where he's been good. They bring Matt Kemp in thinking that he's going to be lightning in a bottle, and the Mets know him well. They cut him after a month, so he can't ever stay healthy. They bring in Matt Joyce as well, who, a better first baseman DH kind of guy, but, they have some interesting pieces there, and Jesus Aguilar is interesting, and VR is interesting, but pitching's the name of the game. And I know you said they have some good young starters, but they're not very good. They don't have a lot of depth there. They want young guys to really be number 2s and 3s when we're talking Caleb Smith and Pablo Lopez. Alcantara, you saw shades that he could be something special last year, but it's all about the bullpen. And especially in this shortened season where the bullpen's going to be relied upon, considering these starters aren't going to be the freshest whenever the season starts because there's not enough game action. The bullpens are going to be big, and I think the bullpen, it's going to be their demise this year. But listen, again, in a shortened season, they could be intriguing, but I just don't see them competing with the other guys.
Absolutely. And they also brought in one of my good friends that just blew lead after lead for the Dodgers, and Yimi Garcia. So there's another reason to fade the Miami Marlins right there. And Jake, just in general, what do you think is the biggest thing to look for these next couple of weeks with regards to baseball? Just because there are a lot of under-the-radar signings, and I feel like a lot of them are in the NL East. I think we did a very solid job of being able to cover those. But what do you think is the most important thing to just see these next couple of weeks? Because I've been saying it on this podcast for quite a while. I think that we're going to be getting baseball back right around the 4th of July, maybe a little bit sooner, maybe a little bit later. There's just not much reason to believe that we're going to be able to get that end of May like Rob Manfred was hoping for when he did that interview with Scott Van Pelt a couple weeks ago. But at the same time, I do think that we are eventually going to be getting a baseball season we fortunately have finally been getting a little bit of good news on the coronavirus front. Obviously, we have a long, long way to go. But with that said, I'm just so intrigued by all these discussions that are going on, because in order to get in as many games as possible, it seems like the players are willing to do whatever it takes to do so.
Yeah, and Steven Matz told me this is weird for him, and he's not sure what he wants, but he does want, the most games possible, and guys want to play. So he didn't really answer to, would you be cool playing with no fans? I don't think any player is really cool with it, but they'll do it because, one, they get paid. Two, a lot of these guys who are working for deals in the offseason of next year want to get out there to prove themselves, because how are they going to prove themselves for the following year if they didn't play? It's a very bizarre situation. I think same thing right around first week of July. Listen, if it's in those empty stadiums, fine. It's very frustrating to me as someone who goes to 30 to 40 Mets games a year to think of a year not going at all. It's almost like I'm going to go through withdrawal symptoms. Well, it would be interesting if it quiets down by September, October, because if football games are doing it with full stadiums, maybe they do September games back in the home stadium. You get a month of them, and then playoffs at home. That would make every game essentially a sellout if it was 1 month and then playoffs. I think that's something baseball should consider. You set up the schedule, but maybe you leave the location to be determined to see where this stands. Because if football is doing it, I don't see why baseball would, do it all year long. But, it's a lot of wait and see. But I think it's going to be intriguing. I think short season is intriguing. I think baseball's got to look at the new rule changes and maybe revert back to the old way. The whole, one batter rule. A lot of things are going to have to be examined in all these rule changes they're doing. And I think All-Star Week, you probably got to get rid of it, honestly. If there was a year to get rid of the All-Star game, it's this year. I don't think any fan would care at all. If they got rid of All-Star Week, I don't think people would care. The problem is they're going to baseball losing money, because obviously that's a cash cow. You get all the businesses and sponsors, or maybe they push it back. But if it's going to be a shortened season, I'm not the biggest fan of even considering having an All-Star game. So there's a lot of things to look at. Rule changes, All-Star game, playoff format, locations. I'm curious to see these next couple of weeks. Hopefully we get updates and positive updates and things start to transpire, but a lot to look forward to.
I'm right there with you, but one thing that I know that is absolutely stellar, and one thing that we cannot do without, that is your podcast, Jake. Would like to close it up with this. Let the good people at home know what you're working on and just how you're staying with it in general, because I know you do the Amazing But True Mets podcast for the New York Post, and you do a variety of things, and you do them all so well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We got 6 shows going on. So the Mets show is me and Nelson Figueroa, the former Met, and, it's getting rave reviews so far. People love it. We've got Steven Matz, Mike Piazza, John Franco, Jim Brewer, Edgardo Alfonso. So we've had big guests. We got a lot of big guests to come. Yankees podcast with Chris Sheeran and former Yankee Jeff Nelson. We had Dasha Polanco from Orange is the New Black, Nick Cicero from The Longest Yard, and big Yankee fan on. So get a lot of celebrities and actors in the mix. And I'm also co-hosting the final few episodes of this season of the Giants podcast, Blue Rush. I'm doing a pre-draft show in 2 weeks and then the post-draft show after they make their picks. So I'm doing a lot of co-hosting and chiming in and booking guests and producing. So check out those New York Post podcasts. They're a lot of fun. Yankees and Mets drop Mondays. Rangers up in the blue seat with former Ranger Ron Duguay is Wednesdays. And check out the draft ones in a couple weeks. So, got to keep people entertained. As you know well, during this quarantine, you would hope people are home and bored, which I sure am, and they will tune into podcasts. So the numbers haven't shown it really, but I think people are starting to get delirious, so they're looking for things to listen to.
Absolutely. I think that they're sick of watching Tiger King. They've binge watched every single show that there is to binge watch. So people are running a little bit short, and hopefully we are going to be getting sports back into our lives. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And Jake is going to be very prepared, much like I will be, for when the baseball season does start up. And if you like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you ever have a question for the podcast, fire it in my timeline at Junior_41. We're going to be keeping this thing going 3 times a week. So thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you guys are all safe and healthy, and hopefully we will be getting baseball back sooner rather than later.